Daily Bible Time, Friday morning, in 2 Samuel chapter 24 today, and I had naively thought we would tackle the whole chapter, but in fact we're only going to get to the very first verse today, because there is so much to learn from this last chapter in 2 Samuel. Chapter 24 of 2 Samuel, verse 1, the Lord's anger burned against Israel again, and he stirred up David against them to say, go count the people of Israel and Judah. So the Lord is angry with Israel. So I take it the anger is just. Israel has sinned. And I take it that what Israel has done has been done in the time that David was king, and there needs to be a judgment because of Israel's sin. The Lord determines to use David as an instrument of judgment on his people. Now, we know that. As the reader, David does not know that what he's doing is, well, God is using him as an instrument of judgment on his people. And certainly the nation of Israel does not know that their king is being used by the Lord as an agent of judgment on them. So David doesn't know that as he is stirred to conduct a census, that he's being used by the Lord as an instrument of judgment on the people. I take it that what's going on in David's head is he's thinking he has had the idea of conducting the census. Certainly he doesn't consult the Lord and ask the Lord, well, shall I conduct a census? He just goes ahead and does it. Now, here's a surprise. You look over to 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1, and there's a parallel account of this incident. I'm just going to read you the first verse. 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1. Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to count the people of Israel. So David said to Joab and the commanders of the troops, go count Israel from Beersheba to Dan. Bring a report to me so I can know their number. Did you notice there? In 1 Chronicles, it was Satan that rose up against Israel and incited David. Whereas in our passage, 2 Samuel 24, it is the Lord's anger that burns against Israel. So he causes David to count the census. Now, I have many times in question time, after sermons in church, had the question asked about really the wrestle between, well, is God in control over evil? And one of my go-to passages in terms of answering this question of, is God in control? Is God still sovereign when evil happens? Here's my answer. Well, it was Satan that took an evil initiative in 1 Chronicles 21, and yet 2 Samuel 24, verse 1, clearly says God is in control. So, God is in control even over the evil in the world. Now, my illustration is it's like Satan's always trying to take initiatives to do evil. He's kind of like a wild pit bull terrier, and sometimes God lets out Satan's leash to do the evil that Satan wants to do. Now, this is actually taught in other places in the scriptures, that God is in control over evil. There's a famous moment at the end of Genesis where Joseph's brothers are apologizing to him. So remember, Joseph, Technicolor Dreamcoat, Genesis, they sell him into slavery. I mean, first they put him in a well, then they sell him into slavery. There is an evil act from somebody that you would expect to care for you. But Joseph says in this moment in Genesis 50, you intended it for evil, this act of selling me into slavery, but God intended it for good. Yeah, you were doing your evil thing, and yet somehow God was using your evil for his good purposes. And in fact, you see an even more clear example of this with the crucifixion of Jesus. The killing of Jesus, it was murder, an act of evil men. And yet somehow God was over it. Listen to how the Apostle Peter explains this in Acts chapter 2. He says, Acts chapter 2, verse 22, fellow Israelites, listen to these words. This Jesus of Nazareth was a man attested to you by God with miracles, wonders, and signs that God did among you through him, just as you yourselves know. Though he was delivered up according to God's determined plan and foreknowledge, you used lawless people to nail him to the cross and kill him. God raised him up ending the pains of death because it was not possible for him to be held by death. So yes, it was God's set plan and foreknowledge that you would use wicked men to murder the Lord Jesus. And so you see there the joining of divine sovereignty and human responsibility, even over the acts of evil. Now, you can see selling your brother into slavery, that's clearly an evil act. Murdering the Lord's anointed, that's clearly an evil act, and God is sovereign over them. But why is numbering Israel, conducting a census of Israel, evil? I mean, to be honest, I filled in the Australian census a couple of weeks ago, as I imagine you did, and I did not imagine for a moment that our government was engaging in evil as they asked a number of questions at the census. So why might we think, or why does the Bible think, that David counting the numbers of Israelites is an evil act? Well, that's for Monday's Daily Bible Time, and I do hope you'll join us then. Hey, Sunday at church, we're online again for we're going to stay online, of course, but last moment of only online church, and for hopefully, we're praying, a long time. Resuming with physical church, and looking forward to that on the 17th of October. Thanks for joining us on Daily Bible Time today. See you Sunday for church, Monday for the next little bit of 2 Samuel chapter 24.